Hey there, friends. Welcome back to Second Star to the Left. I'm Michelle, and this is Billy.
Hi.
And here's where we'll share board game reviews, ramblings, and a few wrong turns along the scenic route. Today we're going to talk about puzzling out polyominoes. I mean, how many of these do we need? We'll see. If you're asking yourself, what is a polyomino? That's fine. That's a fair question. Technically, the definition is that it's a plane shape made out of squares connected orthogonally to each other to create shapes. But the real answer is they're Tetris shapes. The same shapes you've been turning, twisting, and puzzling to fit together for decades. For a board game, that usually means tile placement or even abstract puzzles, which don't necessarily require a theme, but the ones that I love tend to have a great theme and usually something in addition to that tile placement, something to make them different. And that's why we have this giant pile of different polyomino games, because they all have something a little bit different that makes me want to keep them in the collection. There are a few obvious missing games that I don't have in my collection, and honestly, that I haven't played. I have never played Patchwork. I know. But maybe we're going to look at that Halloween-themed Patchwork that's coming out. That could be the one that tips it over for us. And I've also never played Isle of Cats. The reason for that one is that while I really wanted to back that on Kickstarter, it was a bit pricey knowing that my sister already had a copy, and the only time I'm likely to play it is probably with her. So we'll wait and we'll play that with her. Both of those games, I'm sure, are really strong games. I've heard nothing but good about them. People love them. They're just not on the list because they're not here in the collection. So where did my ever-growing collection begin? Oh, that was a really long time ago. In fact, once upon a time, in a faraway land, before the board game collection came to take over the tallest tower of the house, there was Cathedral. A game of using those Tetris shapes to surround your opponent and control most of the area, but honestly, most of the time is spent trying to figure out how to get the game back in the box. Before we get going, I am going to give an honorable mention to Hadrian's Wall. Right? This is a game that is published by Renegade Games, designed by Bobby Hill. This is a roll and write game. It is probably the heaviest roll and write game that I have played, and definitely the heaviest one that I know about. But if I do a series on roll and write games, this is going to be up near the top of the list. It's not simple, light fun that you're going to pull out late at night and play with your friends. I don't see a board game arena implementation in its future. This is a huge roll and write game with components and meeples and resource management and combo moves. This is a monster of a game that is absolutely one of my favorite games to play solo. It takes about a half hour to get through, maybe more, 45 minutes, depends on how your turns run and if you're able to combo those moves together. But this one, I highly recommend. The reason that it's on this list and only as an honorable mention is because it's not technically a polyomino game. However, there is an element of polyomino down in the corner of the score sheets where you can use the shapes on a tile to build out a little polyomino puzzle in the corner and earn more meeples to get more combos to score more points. It's a chain kind of game. I recommend this one if you like to have a go at a heavy roll and write. But as far as a polyomino game, there's just a little bit in there. And honestly, I just wanted a chance to talk about Hadrian's Wall. So if you get a chance to check this out, go ahead and do that. Since we're talking about roll and writes, let's start there. I love polyomino roll and writes because they combine two of my favorite things, that tile placement plus also the roll and write. That combination of luck and chance balanced with skill and decision and good choices. The first one I want to talk about is Cartographers. Cartographers is published by Thunderwork Games. It is designed by Jordi Odin. This is a game that takes place in the role player universe, a game that I have not played but would like to. You don't need to have any familiarity with that universe to enjoy this little game. This is a flip and write game that takes place over 4 seasons, and you're going to flip over the cards and draw the shape that's on those cards. You do have a choice whether you want to draw that shape using trees or water or mountains, you're just going to be drawing those Tetris shapes onto the player sheet and trying to fill out your sheet as completely and as quickly as you can during those 4 seasons. This one does have a little bit more interaction than some of the other roll and writes and polyomino games, because on certain times you might flip over a goblin, and if you do, then you're going to pass your scorecard to the player next to you, and they are going to draw that polyomino shape in what will be the worst possible space for you. You're going to score points based on the goals that were laid out at the beginning of the game, and you'll lose points based on what squares you were unable to cover and what the goblins have done to you. This is a quick little roll and write. It takes 30 to 45 minutes to play, and it's easy to play remotely. Our next roll and write polyomino game is Lanterns Dice. Lanterns Dice is published by Renegade Games and designed by Chris Bryan. It is a version of the game Lanterns, which we haven't played. It is a dual layer polyomino game. So first you're going to roll these dice in this nifty little tray that they give you. You just kind of shuffle them up in there, choose which color you want, and turn the tray to orient it towards you, so that the die that you want is pointing towards you and your opponents will be pointing towards them. You can use this to keep that color away from your opponent if you know they're looking for something, or to just choose which color you're going to want. Those choices are up to you. It can be a little bit take that. It doesn't need to be. Either way, you're going to get a lot of enjoyment out of the game. The first stage is using that colored die to color in the space on your board. Once you've colored in enough spaces, using the bonuses and the extra actions that you'll find in the game, then you're actually coloring in the shape of those polyomino tiles. You will choose that polyomino tile and place it on top of the shape that you have colored in. When you're choosing your tile, the first one to pick from the pile of shapes is going to score the most points. Those tiles become worth less and less as you go down through the pile. So whoever's making the best choices and getting those shapes drawn first is going to score more points. In the end, you're going to score points based on the polyomino tiles that you were able to place onto your board. So you want to get as many of those on the board as you can. Lanterns Dice, or Epcot Dice as we like to call it, because it reminds us so much of the fireworks at Epcot at Disney World, is a really good choice. It's quick, it's 30 minutes. I've only played it at 2-player. I'm sure that at 3 and 4-player, your choices are going to be more interesting because you do take actions on other people's turns. And with 4 players, you're going to have more of an opportunity to do that. However, it plays really well at 2 players. I highly recommend it. And if you're looking for a polyomino game that has kind of more layers to what you're going to do and a little more advanced planning, then this is going to be it. All right, on to more traditional polyomino games. This next one is going to come with a caveat. So now we're looking at the big one, right? A Feast for Odin by Uwe Rosenberg. We have had this game on our shelf for a year and a half, maybe 2 years, and finally this week managed to get it out on the table and play. I'm not going to say that this was the best play that we've ever had, but it was enough for us to know that we would like to get it back on the table, that we would like to try it again. Thematically, A Feast for Odin does things that other polyomino games don't manage to do. You're placing your workers, gathering resources, you have to feed the Vikings, you can go raiding. There are so many choices that I don't think you could ever use the same path to victory the same way 2 times in a row. This is a game that will obviously stay in our collection. It's going to take some more plays before we decide whether we love it or are just intrigued by it, but this is a classic for a very good reason. If you're looking for a heavier, big, full table covering polyomino game, then Feast for Odin is going to be your choice. You honestly can't go wrong with an Uwe Rosenberg polyomino game. Although I will say that trying to Tetris it all back in the box, even with the folded space insert, was a puzzle all in itself. It seems that that's the case for a lot of these games. The next game is Indian Summer, which is another Uwe Rosenberg game. And this one is published by Stronghold Games. This is the first polyomino game that we bought, so this one has a special place in our heart. Indian Summer is part of the trilogy, which consists of Cottage Garden, Indian Summer, and Spring Meadow. This is the best of the trilogy. Although it's the only one we've owned, I have played the other ones in digital form, which isn't the same, but it's enough for me to know that this is going to be my favorite. Honestly, on theme alone, this is going to be my favorite. It is a walk through a fall forest, gathering foliage and critters and berries and leaves. It's a beautiful, beautiful game. We test played it at PAX East a couple years back, right before we bought it. And as soon as we saw it on the table, we knew it was going to come home with us. When we played it, we were even more convinced. As a polyomino game goes, this is a race game. You are racing to fill your boards first. I like those kinds of games. I prefer them over kind of fiddly scoring. I like to know that I can look over at my player's board and see exactly how far ahead or behind I am. As you play, you fill up your forest floor using these foliage spaces. If you manage to line up the holes in the spaces, you earn berries, mushrooms, flowers. You can trade those in to get more tiles, to get cute critters, like fox and raccoons. This is definitely a good start into polyominoes. If you like the theme, you're going to be enchanted with these critters and the graphics. It's gorgeous. It is an easier game to learn because you're not worried about scoring. You're simply worried about filling up the space on your board before the other person. Indian Summer is a pretty quick game. It plays in 15 to 20 minutes. So once you know the rules, you're going to whip through a couple of rounds of this really quick. Fun to bring to the table. Really great with people who haven't played yet because it's just beautiful to look at. Next up is Barenpark, because honestly, bears in a park. I mean, bears. This is a Phil Walker-Harding game, so you know that it's good. It's published by Mayfair, or it was when we bought this copy. I'm not sure now. This was our second game in. We had actually been looking for this when we found Indian Summer. This is a classic polyomino game. You are building a bear park. So you have a board. As you cover spaces, you're allowed to construct enclosures. As in the lanterns dice game, you're selecting from a pile, and the person who gets there first, the tiles on top are worth more points. So it's a race to get to those tiles. This is not a race game. This is a game where you're going to score points depending on what enclosures you've managed to put on your board. You can add additions to your park, adding another board, just trying to fill in those spaces so that you can get more enclosures, so that you can get more points. This game takes about 30 to 45 minutes to play. Setup on this can be a bit fiddly because you have to pile all those enclosure tiles by number onto the player boards in the middle. But it's worth it. This is definitely a game that I would recommend, especially if you're just starting. This is one of the classics. We do not have the expansion, and I don't know that I'm inclined to get it. I've heard mixed reviews. Some people love it. Some people don't think it's worth it. I think this game is enough as it is. I think it's replayable as it is. We don't play it quite as often as some of the ones that are simpler to set up because of setup. But otherwise, this one is one of the ones that I would start out with. We're going to move on to a legacy game, which is My City. This is a legacy campaign game, and honestly, we have avoided all of the legacy games, mostly because I have the attention span of a gnat, and the idea of me playing the same game that many times in a row, that close together, it's just not likely to happen. But also because I don't like the idea of permanently altering a board so that I cannot start over and I cannot pass the game to a friend. It's something that's not appealing to me. I know people love it, and honestly, if I'm not going to play the game that many times, I'm not sure why I'm worried about it, but it's not for me. This is different because the board has two sides. It has the side that you alter using stickers that you'll find in the envelopes as you move through the campaign levels, but it also has a forever side that you can play with anyone, doesn't matter where you are in the campaign, which makes it so that you can share this game and play it as often as you want. So in the campaign side, you're going to have a nice stack of envelopes, no peeking, that add things. They add new rules, they add new additions to the board, they add new building tiles as you move through the game. But on the forever side, it is just a tile placement polyomino game. You're going to take turns flipping over cards to place a tile on your board, following pretty simple placement rules regarding the river and other tiles. And then at the end, you're going to score points for the buildings that you've placed, for the most that are connected, and you'll lose points for things that you were unable to cover up on the board. It is a simple, tight little building game. It is a limited turn game because once you go through the deck of cards, that's the end of the turn. It gets progressively harder as you move through the campaign to fill this board. You will find that every choice has a consequence, that you are going to have to pass and take negative points for not being able to place tiles. It's a really nice little puzzle. It takes about 30 minutes to play. We're enjoying the campaign, but we're not obsessed with getting to those next envelopes right away every time. So it's nice to be able to play either version and to be able to share it with people who aren't involved in the campaign. So that's My City, which is a Reiner Knizia game published by Cosmos. Next game is Tiny Towns. Oh, I just heard all the pieces rattle around in there. That can't be good. This one is a bit of a different take on the polyomino game. You're not placing polyomino tiles. Instead, you're building out those polyomino shapes using resources that you've collected during your turn. On each turn, you're going to choose a resource type to take. You get that resource and your opponents get that resource, and you decide where to place it on your board to try and recreate one of the shapes that's listed on the goal cards. Once you do that, you remove those resources from your board, place the building on one of the squares where you were building it out, and keep going. You have to be very careful and plan your turn moves in advance to make sure that you don't trap yourself into a situation where you can't build another polyomino shape even though you have space on your board. Each of the buildings that you place has different rules for scoring, so placing them next to each other strategically earns you more points or penalizes you at the end of the game. It makes for really, really tricky choices. Just be careful not to build yourself into a corner. We do have both expansions for this. Fortunes and Villagers. I want to say those are the names of expansion. We have played the Fortunes one. We have not played the Villagers version. We're going to do that soon. They add something to the game. They add a little bit of cuteness, but this puzzle on its own is very replayable. You have different goals every time the cards get shuffled. You pick different goals. And I honestly think that repeating goals that you've played before is a benefit because you start to be able to learn a strategy. Because the first time you're going to play a goal, it's kind of hit or miss if you know how to accomplish those things. So Tiny Towns is a polyomino game without the polyomino tiles. So give that one a try. All right, we're getting down there in the pile, believe it or not. This one is called Grand Carnival. It's one of the newer additions to our pile of polyomino games. This one is a multi-level puzzle. It's a tile drafting action mechanics game where you're also building out polyominoes. You're going to have a supply of meeples next to the action track, each next to a specific number. And on your turn, you're going to choose one of those meeples to take an action worth the amount of points it's next to. If you want to move 3 spaces, use the meeple next to the 3. You can move the guest 3 spaces through your fairgrounds. You cannot reuse a number until you've used all 5, which means you better be thinking ahead at what decisions you want to make. And on your turn, you can either draft a tile to place onto the fairgrounds, building out building spaces and pathways, or you can place a polyomino tile onto those building spaces, covering the spaces that you created shaped like those tiles. So you're creating the polyomino shape out of building tiles, then getting the polyomino to place on it. In addition, you're also going to score points for being able to move a guest from the entrance up through the pathways to the big top. So you can't block off the pathways with those building spaces. You're going to score points based on the number of attractions you were able to put, the number of tickets that you were able to sell, the number of guests you were able to move through this fairground up to the big top, the number of carnival barkers. There are goals, there are special powers. This is layer upon layer of polyomino game with a beautiful theme. It is a game by Rob Kramer, art by Ryan Goldsberry, and it is published by Uproarious Games. This one it almost took out maybe Barenpark, except that Barenpark is such a wonderful, simple game that is just straightforward polyominoes. This one adds so many layers that they absolutely don't compete, and the theme is a carnival, which, look at that art, honestly. So Grand Carnival if you want something with a bit more layers on top of it. Okay, on to New York Zoo. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about New York Zoo, as this was the first video that we made, and this is one of our favorites. Designed by Uwe Rosenberg, published by Capstone Games. This is a tile drafting, animal breeding polyomino game. You're going to move around the player track, draft those polyomino tiles to put in your zoo as enclosures, put animeeples in, breed the animeeples, fill up those enclosures to trade them in for an attraction, and just constant race to fill up your board. I like a race style polyomino game. I like being able to look at my opponent and know whether I'm winning or losing in a quick glance. These are always tight games. I've never had anyone run away with the win in this game. And it's great for introducing new people to the game, because if you want to play a game, animeeples are going to be a big sell. I mean, it's a zoo game. Highly recommend this. Have a look at it if you haven't, and check out the video. Okay, last one. This is our newest baby here. Paris, La Cite de la Lumiere, the City of Lights. Thematically, Paris shines over other games. The vibrant colors, the postcards as action cards, the streetlights that let you imagine a rainy evening stroll along the Paris streets. This game has all of that in this tiny little box. The player components are based on the sun and the moon, and they are charming, and the colors are rich, and they're not primary colors, which is always a plus for me when I'm looking at player colors. I really don't want to play red, yellow, blue. These are beautiful. Like Grand Carnival, this is a dual layered tile placement game. Unlike it though, it is cleverly played right inside the box. The first round, you have one of two actions. You either place one of your cobblestone tiles down into the box, creating streets and sidewalks and building sites, or you draft a polyomino tile from the player pool. You have to be careful though, because all these tiles that you draft have to be placed in the second round, or you'll get penalized for each tile that you are unable to place. In the second round, you either use one of your player powers by placing a token along one of the postcards and using one of the powers on there, or you place one of the polyomino tiles that you have already drafted onto cobblestones that match your player color or the neutral player color. That's it. Those are the rules. You score points for buildings that are illuminated by a streetlight, or for the largest group of buildings that you have that are touching. It's a simple concept that always has you thinking a few moves ahead. It is difficult to fit all of the moves you want to in this small, tiny space, which means you're competing for those spaces with your opponent. It is strictly a two-player game. It's published by Devere Games and designed by Jose Antonio Abascal. This little box has more polyomino fun than most games of its size. I highly recommend this one. We have played this as often as I can convince everybody to play it in the last week. This game just shines. The components are dual layered polyomino tiles. The artwork looks like paintings from a museum. There's so much quality in this little box that it's hard not to recommend it. So this is a huge recommend from us. Give it a try. What is the answer to how many polyomino games do I need in my collection? That's still to be determined, because right now it looks like 11, I think 11, but it could be more, it could be less. Right now, all these games serve a different purpose in my collection. They're all different enough to me that they're worth keeping. Will something come along that replaces them? It might, it definitely might. But for now, I feel like if I want something small and quick, I have a choice. Do I want to roll and write? Do I want to take out a giant game and fill up the table and spend hours with it? I have choices for all of those. Thematically, they're all very different, although there's a bit of a nature theme going on here. Apparently, we like animals. The answer to how many of these do you need? That's up to you. I think that polyomino games are like tile placement games where you can't just say, I'm going to have one. I mean, I guess you can, but there's so many different mechanics that can be involved with placing those tiles on the board that it's just one of many in a game. If the game is strictly one mechanic, then that one might be more likely to get culled eventually. But games that have different levels of play, that have various levels of strategy, that are thematically different than other things that I have on my shelf, those games are going to stay. I like variety. Now I just have to figure out how to Tetris them onto my shelf. Well, that's it. If you liked what you saw or you want to watch until we get one right, please like, subscribe, and share. As always, open tables, open minds, and play your shelves.